In 1966, a powerful eruption took place near the city of Damascus in the Ukraine. It was estimated that 33,000 cubic meters of molten lava swallowed an entire village, along with its unsuspecting inhabitants, Bulgarian researcher the New Earth Lady states. However, the disastrous eruption was not from a naturally formed volcano. It was the consequences of man trying to dominate a planet that has more than enough power to fight back, she said. A short quote from the head professor of geology at a national university stated, "It was a volcanic eruption in the most direct sense of the word, as the scene around me reminded me of the last days of Pompeii." The hill that erupted was not a volcano. It was what's called a spoil tip or spoil bank, and although the disaster happened half a century ago, it was relatively recently made newsworthy when it was declassified and allowed as public information. One can only surmise that it was originally kept a secret so that the public would not be aware how dangerous these spoil tips can be. These hills and mountains consist of the spoils or waste rock that are removed during coal and ore mining. The heaps are usually composed of shale and contain small quantities of carboniferous sandstone and various other surplus residue materials. Sometimes they can increase to millions of tons, and what can make them so dangerous many years after they were formed is that they trap solar heat and can self-ignite and burn slowly for years after they have been abandoned, percolating chemicals, emitting greenhouse gases, and proliferating the risk of landslide. Out of the 580 spoil tips in this area of the Ukraine, 114 have a molten core because of the chemical reactions that take place in these artificial mountains. At first glance, these heaps have the same appearance as volcanoes. Here we attempt to show a new light or perspective, if you will, on the various features of the landscape on our planet which we automatically call natural due to their appearance. But the reality is that a lot of these features may not be completely natural at all, the New Earth Lady suggests. There are various classifications of volcanoes, and one of these is the cinder cone, many of which are large, regular-shaped piles of slag, similar to the slag piles left from the mining industry. So how do we really know what are cinder cone volcanoes and which are possibly spoil tips? It is conceivable that some of these hills are indeed mining remnants that have been left from previous civilizations of the past. Thanks to Google Earth and aerial photographs, we have the chance to see clear examples of these numerous hills and mountains with their many different configurations. But if they truly are a natural mark on the landscape that popped up through the surface of the Earth so many years ago, then surely they should be consistent in their composition. As a coincidence, if such things exist, we find another disaster that developed from the same source, that of mining, with equally disastrous outcomes. In Aberfan in Wales, in the UK, 140,000 cubic yards of slag slurry burst from a slag heap and rushed down the mountainside, killing 144 people below in the village, most of which were children, whom sat at their school desks as the material buried them all in the school. It is possible, the New Earth Lady suggests, that evidence for mining may have a much longer history than initially perceived or taught in our history. Take, for example, the walls of the Grand Canyons, he suggests. In parts, they are so smooth and look more like early examples of quarrying and mining. Natural erosion, she states, looks like this. But the smooth surface that forms some of the canyon walls does not conform to natural erosion, she believes. Rivers, we are taught, cut through the rocks of the canyon, but they are not as uniformed when cutting their way through some stone. They rarely, if ever, leave behind perfectly straight lines in rock. These images of open quarries taken from our modern times look remarkably like those allegedly cut by a river through the Grand Canyon, leading to her suspicion of the present historical accounts of her past. These two pictures do question our present historical context. Take for example the rock on the right with the guy climbing on it. The split is obviously natural, but the rock on the left looks like it possesses ancient swirl-like tool marks on its wall. Opencast mining, the New Earth Lady states, is produced by a machine being moved into the centre of an area, and it removes vast amounts of material in a circular fashion. If you compare these mountains previously covered by snow in Antarctica, they also seem to show the same open-cast similarities, which could only have been placed there prior to the last ice age. The New Earth Lady points out that given enough time, our open-cast quarries will eventually become amazing wonders like those from her own past. Take for instance the waste dumped from a mine like this may, over the course of centuries, look like this, and would be called naturally formed hills. Flat hill slag heaps can, of course, over time develop plant growth, although this can be slow, as many of those mining materials can be toxic, she states, and many of the hills, she believes, are all of a precise shape. Many of the ancient mountains show signs of being cut and removed, such as those in Nazca in Peru, she believes. Many aspects of mining give a byproduct of chalk, and around the world we find many examples of chalk heaps cast over the planet, possibly from a more ancient past, which lends support to the New Earth Lady's hypothesis, supporting ancient miners. Bulgarian researcher the New Earth Lady states that a few years ago she began hearing about megalithic stones found in Gorshoria, but then the site went silent and no further information was forthcoming. Finally, in 2016, she obtained an update from fellow researcher Vadim Chernobrov from Russia. It would seem, unlike other researchers, that after visiting the site, that the stones had been formed absolutely naturally. He goes on to suggest the stones have cracked at right angles, forming these large rocks that look like standing stones, which could have been used at Stonehenge in England. He draws his evidence from the areas less explored at Gorshoria and ignores the larger stones previously focused on by other researchers, believing that this site was once an old volcano and the rocks are all naturally formed, dropping the bombshell. Although it is completely natural in its formation, he said, he couldn't help but notice that some of the rocks seems to have been touched by intelligent design. One location on the site they had noticed a binding material between the stones. Laboratory tests returned unclear, leaving an enigma. It is quite hard to obtain further information on these results, the New Earth Lady states, due to the practices of her fellow researcher, who delays delivery of the information for 5 years. It is quite possible this delay is due to the workload faced by the team of researchers who organise many fully equipped expeditions each year into the Russian outback and are known as one of the largest alternative research units in the country. On another location, Chernobrov stated the rocks didn't look natural. Below this overhang is a possible entrance which was filled in with polygonal masonry. It is a massive entrance, and much larger than any human, and over 40 meters wide. So in principle, he believes, it is a massive blocked doorway. They did try to scan the entrance, but came up empty because they couldn't get the cameras or scanning equipment between the stones beyond the entrance. It is quite possible the New Earth Lady believes that this is a type of stargate, almost like those found in other places around the world, carved into the rock, much like the one found near Lake Titicaca in Peru. Instead of a normal rockfall, it would seem these stones were rather placed there from another location. Stones of varying shapes are found next to each other, all displaying varying polygonal shapes, but didn't fit with the rockfall layout normally seen in other areas. The New Earth Lady classes the stones found in this area as melterites and asks, what is this site? It seems there is a mixture of natural stone and intelligent designs. Chernobyl goes on to say that many places around the world displaying large stone structures look man-made. Take for example Unigoni, a site beneath the waves off the coast of Japan. He is convinced the site is perfectly natural due to, in principle, a report from a Russian diver who explored the site. Unigoni is easily accessible as long as you are a registered diver and welcomes anyone who can prove it otherwise. He states Unigoni takes the spotlight from other locations, which do display man-made interference, and we need to better focus our efforts on researching these other sites instead of scouring the ocean floor, hoping to find evidence of intelligent design. The Japanese, the New Earth Lady suggests, seem to possess a deep reverence for the large carved stones, both in the water and on dry land, but they don't necessarily pursue an academic interest, leaving a shortfall of information. The New Earth Lady suggests many of the alternative sites Chernobyl speaks about are covered and hidden from the public, and many are forbidden to visit. Much of the historical data, she believes, is presented with a weighted bias, and this leads to relevant history being deleted and rewritten. She believes we have to find an unbiased perspective on our historical past to release the truth and see our past for what it truly is. From the past, she states, artifacts exist which supports the idea that we communicated and had contact with the global world, and other artifacts exist that support the fact that we were in communication with beings much smarter than us. It is a right, she believes, to stray from the herd and look at the evidence and see and learn the truth for ourselves. Bulgarian researcher the New Earth Lady commented on a conversation between Mikhail Jernaklev, who had contacted Alexander Kolchapin, to inform him that there was some sort of strange historic site on the shores of Antalya in Turkey, and nobody seemed to be interested. True enough, when Kolchapin arrived on location, there was a site partially submerged underwater, and so it was given its name, the Jernaklev site. At first glance, it didn't look that exciting because it appeared to be somehow medieval. At least, that would be the first impression one would usually get from looking at the walls, the New Earth Lady suggests. They consist of undressed stones with mortar in between, which was a typical method of construction by the people from the medieval period. But what caught Kolchapin's attention was that upon further inspection, he realized it wasn't stones that were mixed with the mortar. It was actually volcanic bombs. When a volcano becomes active, it spews not only lava and gases, it also ejects materials which in geology are called volcanic bombs. These projectiles can range in size from 2.5 inches to over 20 feet, and can be found up to 2,000 feet from the volcanic vent. These volcanic bombs can sometimes be described as having the appearance of a sourdough loaf on the inside, or a webbed or branched appearance with a crusted exterior. These unusual shapes are formed as the bombs cool down while flying through the air after the volcano erupts. The Jernaklev site is made up of these exact volcanic bombs, but what makes them so unusual is that not only are they not found anywhere else around the area, there is actually no volcano in the region either. When Kolchapin checked the geological maps of the area, it turned out that there were no active volcanoes, nor were there any traces of evidence of there being any volcanoes in the region in the relative recent geological history. He found, through excavating some of the extremely ancient layers, that there was an abundance of these volcanic bombs. This brought Kolchapin to conclude that it was many thousands, if not millions of years ago, that this building material was indeed available in the area. This, however, was not the end of the mystery. It turned out what had at first sight looked like natural basalt in the bedrock were actually armatures sticking out, which would have been cast and not natural at all. What was even more surprising was that these armatures were much harder than one would expect from old rusted pieces of metal. Kolchapin eventually managed to take a small sample of this metal for testing, and the peculiar results from the analysis showed that it was galvanized steel with a chemical composition radically different from modern steel. It seems the old recipe was by far a better quality of metal and proved to be much stronger and harder and could endure better through the ages. It is important to note that the process of galvanization is supposed to be a relatively modern discovery, according to the historians at least, although there are many galvanized artifacts that have appeared here and there over the course of history. Discovered on the site also were broken pieces of ceramics that were found near the top in what looked like basalt rock. Were they part of the mixture when they were constructing the site, she asks, or were they there when the rock naturally formed? Either way, both are extremely ancient layers, and they prove the presence of intelligent humans in the very extreme antiquity of our ancient past. This would have been many thousands, even possibly a couple of million years ago. If we assume that the official dating of these geological layers is correct, then this site could be as much as 5 million years old, the new Earth Lady suggests. The Julie tracks in Texas are commonly associated with other ancient tracks in different parts of the world, namely because of the similarities. According to Bulgarian researcher the New Earth Lady, she states that it is alleged that wagon wheel tracks are what has left the groove marks that are embedded into the hard rock surface, and this is why they are called cart ruts. Cart ruts themselves are sunken grooves or rilles found in rock, usually in pairs of tracks. The ruts themselves can vary and be very deep and narrow, or they can be wide or shallow. Found both in smooth and rough rock, the Julie tracks are carved into limestone. The same rock surface as well as sandstone make up the ruts that were discovered on the island of Malta. She continues by describing the Julie ruts and offering particular emphasis on the precision and continuity of the ruts, stating that if these ruts were indeed made by carts, then it would have been thousands, if not millions of carts that would have been needed over the course of years to make them. Not only this, she continues, if it truly were wagons laden down with meagre possessions of the pilgrims that were using the same path over a period of time that left these ruts, then they would have all had to have been exactly the same size and followed the exact same path to the millimeter. Also, if it was indeed wagons, as some of the experts say, then why are there no hoof marks left by the beasts that pulled them, also embedded in the bedrock? The New Earth Lady maintains they would have to have been superior animals with extensive technological knowledge that pulled the carts, as to be able to follow the path of previous wagon tracks with such precision that it would almost take the exactitude of a computer. Let us for a few moments examine the cart ruts that are found all over the island of Malta. The original theory claimed that these depressions in the limestone and sandstone were made by vehicles that were transporting heavy cargo, There are holes in the hypothesis for several reasons, however. If the ruts were made by carts continually passing over the same path, then it would be logical to assume that this would make the grooves of the same depth and width all the way along the rock. In some places, though, they are just a few centimeters deep, and in others the depth is 60 centimeters. This inconsistency continues with the width of the ruts, with some being only 10 centimeters wide, while others are 50 centimeters wide. The only thing that is vaguely consistent is the distance between the grooves themselves, but even then, there are variations of a few inches in places. The new Earth Lady's questions certainly cast a shadow of doubt on the conventional belief that it was indeed carts from the past that have made these impressive grooves in the bedrock that have withstood the test of time. Bulgarian researcher, the new Earth Lady, would like to bring to your attention this natural cave. And then look at this once active mine shaft, she says. In due time, she points out the beams will rot, and here is the result: caves that look completely natural. Similar caves, we believe, are completely natural, but she would like to challenge our beliefs and ask us not to be too hasty. Rather, we should focus on the clues. Caves, both above water and below water, turn out to possess elements that cannot be natural, and these are actually ancient and abandoned mines, she believes. If we compare the difference with the Ponevsky mine located in Russia, and compare that with the mountains in Shiraz in Iran, is it possible the location in Iran could have been an ancient mine? The number of sinkholes that are appearing around the planet, she states, seems to be increasing dramatically. She raises the question if it is possible that what we are actually seeing are that a majority of sinkholes are actually the remains of very ancient mines. Scholars will tell us, like in the diagram to the top right, that the hole will develop and create a funnel shape. One would think that was an acceptable answer. However, she points out, in reality, we see something very different. Many of the sinkholes have remarkably smooth sides and form a cylindrical shape. And the new Earth Lady states that this is possibly just the tip of the iceberg. Countless remarkable caves are found on all continents, she states, but each explanation as to how they got there only serves to keep us away from the truth. Unfortunately, sometimes tapping into the truth can be easily cut off by removing excess, she believes. During a hypnotic regression, some information, she believes, was recorded from a subject that may shed light on the making of these vast underground areas. During the session, the subject remarked on melted materials being used to hollow out the earth. To call them gateways to underground worlds would not be entirely correct, as they are more directly connected to gateways to other planes of existence, the subject stated, almost like going to visit your neighbour. Other caverns are simply a grid network to get around. Others are remains of habitation, whilst some are simply just hollowed out for rock sampling, she continued. It would seem, according to the regression, that such journeys using the caves are almost impossible, since the human race has been forced into a more limited existence. Further into the regression, the subject states the beings would focus on a powerful light and direct it as needed that would dissolve the rock, leaving behind these vast passages throughout the planet. The rock doesn't melt and run down into the earth like molten lava. Rather, the rock dissolves and doesn't leave behind any residue, dust or smoke, a very effective method of harvesting particular items from the rocks and creating a network of highways under the earth in which to move freely without being detected on the surface. The new Earth Lady's research certainly leaves behind food for thought, and in particular, who created these old mines and caverns. The evidence would suggest they're not of human stock. So who are they? Or rather, what are they? Bulgarian researcher the New Earth Lady suggests a very impressive megalithic fortress can be found in western Syria and was dedicated to Nimrod, the great-grandson of Noah, and some accounts would allude to his giant-like appearance. Studying the building's appearance, it would suggest she believes multiple building periods. In the lower rocks, the early building period, we find large building blocks that can each reach up to 40 tons in weight, some of which lay scattered in the valley below. Around these walls, we can also see other stonework of a lower quality of repair and obviously from a later period. The style of construction seen in the larger stones is not unique, she states, but is still a fine example. Similar examples can be found in Bosnia, Greece and Italy. The buildings are wrapped in a thick layer of legend which contradict each other and only serve to keep us chasing our tails, she believes. Comparing the Nimrod fortress with this other place in Jordan, we can see the Roman additions to the structure consisting of Roman columns that are built on top of the older stone foundations similar to Nimrod's fortress. However, in the temple of Baalbek, a place that venerated Baal, the son of El Elyon, the leader of the gods, we are told she believes that it was built in a Roman period. There is no tangible truth about the origins of the stone, she states. They all contradict each other and only serve to hide the path of truth. Until recently, the Nimrod fortress was listed in historical accounts as being a castle built by the Christian Crusaders. It seems preposterous that at the height of the Crusaders, the knights had built this fortress. It's more like a place built for giants, she believes. Take for instance the height of the ceilings. They stretch over 5 meters. This would not have been necessary at all. The Crusader building styles are very different to this and clearly from a different period. This fortress, she points out, was built away from any strategic location in the middle of desolate and arid hills. Hardly the site for a castle of such architecture and effort. It would seem the New Earth Lady suggests that the castle's history has gone under review and a new story has emerged of its origin, in that it was built by the Arabs. The reason for this change predominantly occurs due to several Arabic inscriptions that are found on site. This region uses Arabic, she points out, and the building has been repaired many times and stands to reason why Arabic inscriptions would be found from a later period, but in no way would it suggest the fortress was built by the Arabs. Some of the largest stones that are scattered around the base of the fortress have inscriptions, she adds, and are likely to belong to the original builders. Unfortunately, however, little is known about these older inscriptions. Since the older buildings collapsed, there may be some very interesting artifacts still defined under the heavy stone, she points out. Even inside the building's remains are piles of smaller rock that has not been cleared. It would seem the fortress has gone into a type of stasis and no one is trying to find out more information. It is quite possible that the Sea of Galilee stretched further north into the Galilee Panhandle that would bring the fresh waters to the edge of the hills the fortress was built. But there is no known research to support this, but it may explain why a fortress now looks like it was built in the middle of nowhere. Some 6,000 years ago, the sea levels were 4 meters above today, and the temperature was 4 to 6 degrees higher, a period known as the Holocene climate optimum. This strange footage of an alleged UFO flying behind the fortress was filmed by a tourist in 2015. The New Earth lady states that she has no idea if the footage is fake or not, but its appearance near Nimrod's fortress was interesting, she believes. The building possesses polygonal masonry and massive stone blocks, weighing at times in excess of 40 tons each. It is a playground for alternative history researchers, she believes, but despite all this, the interest remains small, and little to no research is presently being undertaken.